As I was reading through the encyclical, there were other nuances and expansive thoughts, some of them very provocative, but it's also very timely. The fact that he addresses and ends with this whole section on AI and war, for example, was a very fitting tone given the times we're living in. So the timing of it is extremely important. And then the other areas that I believe are meant to teach the general public some of the important issues and concerns that have been emerging, with AI for the past 10 years at least. But one of the things he says in the last section of the encyclical is how war is becoming more and more common. But he talks about the just war theory, when a lot of nations have used it as a leverage to legitimize, let's say, wars when it's not strictly about self-defense anymore. What he's saying is that in some ways, we need to relook at that ultimately, of course, every nation has a right to defend themselves. No question about that. But then we're living in different times. When that was developed, that was during a time when wars were fought more physically, with human beings against human beings. Well, during this time of AI, it's kind of shifted, and we've been following this with the drone attacks going on between Russia and Ukraine. Now we're getting to a point where AI is going to begin to become more integrated to war strategies, to even to a point, as he points out, it will actually start making decisions without humans being in the loop. So to that extent, he was saying perhaps the just war theory is kind of outdated. We need to begin to not necessarily, of course, don't get rid of the idea of self-defense, but perhaps update it to where AI might be leading it. And from his perspective, that's kind of a cause for grave concern. Because when Pope Leo XIII wrote Rerum Novarum, which means new things, he was addressing the Industrial Revolution. And back then, 135 years ago, the issues of dignity of work, of fair wage, of our whole lifestyle, and how the industrial age and this whole concept of even working 9 to 5, that's all coming out of the industrial age. That will effectively change the world as we know it, and in fact it did. Well, Pope Leo is bringing this now to not so much the industrial age, but the AI age. The issues then of human dignity, human presence, being in these various locations at the same time, and human worth will be redefined, for better or for worse. What Pope Leo is essentially saying is that hopefully it doesn't become for worse, that we don't become too immersive in this hybridization between the digital, the human, and the various locations. While technology may go there, how do we keep tabs on that? How do we balance some of these issues, again, of time, work, play, prayer, family, relationships, and leisure? It takes power to process that data as soon as I press enter. If you feel at the bottom of your laptop, you'll notice it's warm. Well, it's the same thing with AI data centers being built, in various locations throughout the country and throughout the world. It needs water to be able to cool down that process. On average, if I do 10 prompts on a Google search, that might take about 2 teaspoons of water. However, if I do 10 prompts in ChatGPT or Claude, that's close to like a liter of water. So what's happening now, companies are going into these various locations throughout the country, and they're trying to build up these data centers, which they used to be the size of football fields. They're actually becoming the size of Central Park, but they're doing it in some locations where the people and local communities there do not have enough sustainable water. They can't use the water from the ocean. It has to be fresh water. They promise them more jobs, which is usually the pitch most company would say. And that may be the case for the year or two. But then once the data centers are created, those jobs, the immediate building of those jobs, leave. On average, you might need about 100 to 150 workers to maintain a data center per se. So what happens after that? There just doesn't seem to be any game plan or governance to be able to regulate this. Pope Francis and other Vatican representatives and leaders, they actually began to meet with people from Silicon Valley. We don't know who exactly for the first 2 or 3 years, but starting around 2016, they would meet in what we would call the Minerva Dialogues, leading to this statement in 2020, the Rome Call for AI Ethics, which was actually a collaboration with people like Microsoft, IBM, and the Vatican. So this has been always progressing. By the time, in some ways, when you have the launch of this with Christopher Olah representing Anthropic, in some ways it's sort of like the culmination of this 10-year trajectory. Now, Christopher Olah was a co-founder of Anthropic. They tend to lean toward being more ethically conscious and concerned. In fact, they've been gathering various theologians from various religious traditions over the past few years themselves. My guess is that Pope Leo invited Olah to be part of that, not only to represent that ongoing dialogue, but also to kind of show that this is where we actually have to go. We have to create these moments of dialogue.